Hello everyone, I'm Sean Almeida, CEO and founder of Vestor.Estate. Today we have a very special video. Joining me is Daniel Aspleaf. He is the managing director of an engineering firm called CDM Engineering. Daniel moved to Kyiv in 2010, working for another firm. And then in 2013, he started his own engineering company, CDM Engineering. He's been working in Ukraine ever since. So, Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of relevant experience that people are going to be interested to watch. So, a little bit of background why I invited Daniel today. So, we don't really overlap that much. I did have some conversations with him about possible reconstruction of an older building that one of our clients was interested in purchasing. And Daniel really schooled me on a lot of things you need to know. I mean, something we haven't done, the kind of proper development or redevelopment of projects, although it is a dream of mine and my team. We would love to sell and to help one of our clients get something bigger, converted into something. So we had some conversations about that. And Daniel and I know each other for quite a while now, had some other conversations, but I think it's really relevant now given what's going on in Ukraine, all the destruction that's happening. We could go on and on about how tragic it is for us. We love it here. We're still here. Daniel went off to the west a little bit. I took my family out of the country completely. So, but he's been back here for quite a while. I just came back last month for the first time. So as you can see, people like Daniel are quite dedicated to the country in general. And given his sphere, it's going to be very relevant moving forward with all the issues that need to be overcome. In terms of getting the country rebuilt. Daniel had some projects, he can tell some more a little bit later, in the east, all around Ukraine before the war, and things are starting to pick back up. And then from my side, I tell everyone, people say, why you do real estate? And there's just not enough, in this country. And so it just seems like I'll be busy for decades. And like on statistics, the main statistics I think I mentioned before on one of my videos, but came from like one of the Department of Infrastructure, was that Ukraine needs 1 billion square meters of housing to get up to the European level of meters per person. And at the current rate of construction, it seems like a lot. You have, cranes everywhere. It still will take 80 years to get to that level, So it's just an absurdly large deficit of housing. It's only getting worse with the war and the destruction that's going on. So I'll start off with Daniel a little bit and tell us how your industry has been impacted, not just maybe your business, but also maybe the broader industry, so that some people can hear just whatever you want to talk about there. So
Sure. No, thanks for that. The industry broadly, and my firm, certainly no different, has taken a pounding. I don't think that's unique for really any type of sector in the country first half of the year. We don't do that much general contracting. We're mostly an engineering and environmental services firm. Mm-hmm. But we do know a lot of contractors. We know other engineering service companies. We know individuals who work as contractors. And, it's pretty clear that a lot of the work opportunities and stuff people had are just gone. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the geography, it's a whole range of things. Engineering and contracting does not like risk. There is no risk higher than the one that we currently find ourselves in. Sure. Imminent invasion is the kind of thing that...
That'll do it, yeah.
And most clients, have never dealt with this. It's not really the kind of thing anybody has a playbook for. We've been pretty fortunate, really. We've had some clients that have stuck with us and gotten us back pretty quickly, quicker than I thought, to be honest. I have, the thing is, I told you, I had my own kind of, 3-month incremental plan from when I got to West Ukraine. We're, I would say, at least a month ahead of schedule in terms of getting back to where I thought we would. But a lot of other firms, I'm sure, they're gone. A lot of engineering firms in Ukraine are small. Mm-hmm. Most of them are either contractors and they're varying in size.
Are these foreign firms you're saying have left, or are you seeing the local ones have just collapsed?
It's both. Mm-hmm. Both. A lot of the local firms, they don't... they tend to manage a little bit more hand to mouth probably than CDM does. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, they just cannot withstand this kind of event. Mm-hmm. They also tend to be a little bit narrower in the overall client base. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in normal circumstances. Sure. But in these circumstances, it can very quickly disappear.
Yeah, diversifying income. That's what saved me.
Yeah.
I told some people when I was back in the U.S. for a little bit that I had all these different streams of income and like complementary and also a little bit different. And they're like, "Wow, your business sounded bulletproof." And it's like, except for these this huge external shock. So taking a bit hit, but we're still surviving. So having multiple different sources, that's definitely lesson number one.
And that's again, I mean, I've always believed in that. I've tried to build the firm that way, in part because aside from just current events, Ukraine routinely suffers elements of other sorts of destabilization, whether it's financial, political.
Absolutely.
You go back, in my time here, now more than 13 years, about every 4 or 5 years, you've got some kind of fairly transformational event that impacts business in a whole range of ways. Yeah. If you go to Western Europe or the United States, I mean, because they're very competitive and mature markets, usually you have to specialize. The type of engineering you provide or the type of work you do needs to be a bit more focused. And then you focus on really being the best in that sector. Build your client base from there. Ukraine's almost the opposite, in my experience, because of the fact that it's not a mature market. I agree.
I think for me, I've done a little bit of both. Where I specialize in an area because even Kyiv itself, I mean, it's massive. It's like the size of San Diego or maybe Greater London or something. I mean, it's really wide. So I focus on a very small area. Also because I've been here since 2010. I've been here since 2012. But the shock of the war back then, and I saw that when the tide pulled out, it affected everybody, but the first place to come back was the very, very center. And for those who know Kyiv, like the stadium, which you can almost see from the center, is way too far. And I told people that in the lower region near the center, Padil, I love going down there. I was down there this weekend, but it's far when things are scary or are dangerous. So focusing on a region
feels far.
So people are like, "Oh, what do you mean? Over there is great." And I said, if you want to go work over there, I can't help you. But I think location matters in real estate, as we know. So okay, yeah. So where do you put the market now? Do you think half the players are permanently gone, or
I mean, it depends a little bit. I mean, I think a number of sort of the smaller local firms will probably regenerate once things are good enough. And they didn't have a lot of skin in the game to begin with. So, they're not going to stop being engineers.
So it's like, I guess one thing I've noticed, maybe you can say this is true or not, but like, since they don't use a lot of debt, that they don't get in that much trouble when things go bad. They're not like they're in trouble and they got to dig their way out of like a $20 billion hryvnia debt. They just have to suck it up for a while and then reconstitute and start making money.
I mean, service firms, are largely just based on personnel cost. If you're on, under the current martial law conditions, everything is essentially force majeure. And if you've got that from your clients, which is in pretty much every engineering or construction contract, right? In the case of force majeure, which includes, and number one is war.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Right? I mean, that's, for the smaller firms that don't have big, standing assets or, big cash flow issues, LLCs and whatnot, even FOPs, right? Those registrations, they can, basically disappear and reappear fairly fluidly. The bigger thing is if you're holding big assets or you're holding, big contractors, maybe have big supplies that are, warehouses are rented. They've got running costs that they cannot get out from under without losing a massive amount of standing revenue. There aren't that many of those. They exist.
I think maybe that was one of the lessons I saw from, when we're ordering materials, like even couches. Like you can't go to a shop and buy 5 couches, or at least not decent ones, because they don't keep any supply on hand because of the big shock in 2014 with not just the war, but the currency. Really, so they got left with stuff they couldn't sell for even close to the dollar amount they bought it for. And so you're saying it's the same for the bigger, like a lot of the bigger.
It's going to be hard for them. I mean, an awful lot of the even mid-level contractors, right, invariably end up having to work on supply bases that are somewhat time extended in a country where you have no real financing, in terms of credit or whatnot. So you can't do a lot of buying in advance. For that reason, it gets pretty challenging, even when you price things in this country to do, before the war, it's challenging because a lot of stuff has to be bought in. I mean, going forward, it's going to be really hard. Okay, first of all, you've lost some contractors. The contractors that remain don't have the financial liquidity to get behind on a contract. They're going to want a prepayment for a lot of things. You've got a sliding currency that has not hit any kind remotely close to, I think, a basement right now. And so, and to your point too, that even a lot of the suppliers' logistics chains to get stuff in have been affected, removed. It's not going to be easy to do things at scale quickly. I can think of a number of things that are going to be challenging.
Okay.
It's got, there's a flip side of the coin, right? Where if you're a foreign firm and you do construction materials or you do things like that, and you really have a little bit of a solid risk tolerance, right? Once things start, the ground starts shaking here badly, stop shaking, with the actual fighting, which at some point will calm to some level, when that is, there's going to be big demand.
Yeah, I think that's...
And you could put yourself in a real good spot, right? I mean, if you're a supplier of precast materials, if you've got, certainly like modular building suppliers, sectors like that, that was not a really big, vibrant market here before the war. I have a feeling now it's going to be pretty hot. If you make concrete cement, you
got a footprint here, or you can get a footprint soon. I think. Yeah,
and you're not exposed.
First mover advantage could be huge too, wouldn't it? Being able. Yeah. So I think those who are interested in future of Ukraine reconstruction, you want to start sooner than later. I think those who are waiting until everything's totally calm won't make it. I think those who don't have any risk tolerance. Because you live here, you realize how far the battles are after a while. People, 2014, everyone got used to it.
It was kind of a training ground for this. Yeah, 2014 was like a preseason football game for the real thing.
That's true.
And we had 8 years where we had an active conflict, and people forget that in Donbass that was a hot border. There was never a peace agreement of any kind, and now you've got a bigger area. It's not done ebbing and flowing. I'm pretty confident of that.
For sure, this is definitely a big movement. But I think the overall point though is that those who want to get into the game, you just start before everything's 100% proper, because like anything. I think when things are up in the air, that's your chance to strike. So.
Yeah, if it was perfect, right, everybody'd already be here.
Yeah, that's no doubt.
This is the nature of this place. Yeah,
absolutely. And what would you say about the personnel in this sphere? Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like most countries, engineering is very dominated by men, as is war. Although there's some super brave and tough Ukrainian women out there fighting too.
Sure.
But still, those two things are both heavily male, if you can confirm that.
Right.
And them being pulled over to the military, or is that not happening because they're skilled engineers?
No, it happens. 2 of my full-time staff are currently serving, and they are both in the East. These are young guys, and so it's real. Right now, what I'm seeing is a lot more available engineers looking for work than, the issue of the war.
So basically, the lack of personnel, basically.
Yeah, and right now it's far easier for us. We've had to actually search for some people. It's clear that the market is far more liquid for available skilled personnel than it was before the war.
I see.
I don't celebrate that. Obviously, it's not a good thing, but that's the numerical reality right now.
I see. Okay. Obviously it's a bit early, here we are, it's almost 6 months to the day the war started, but as we've said, there's some kind of new normal a little bit. Things are, fluid, but, there's still start kind of maybe start to see beginning of the end, let's say, how this might play out a little bit. Are you seeing any, kind of strong trends in the sphere, positive or negative, because of the interest from the aid from the West? Is it anything kind of solidifying that would show how we're going to go forward when the war is over?
Regarding Reconstruction, let's say my sectors, okay, my honest answer is no, it is too early. We all know what we think is going to happen. And I've had some conversations with different, individuals in the Ukrainian government. I talk to donors, and I do talk to foreign contractors who also talk to donors abroad. It's pretty clear there's going to be a lot of reconstruction money available for Ukraine. Less talked about, but still relevant, is the fact that Ukraine is now a pre-accession EU country. I used to work in pre-accession EU countries. Did that before Ukraine.
Which countries?
I used to live in Bulgaria.
Okay.
And I worked in a couple of the Balkan markets back in the middle part of, 2006, 7, 8, and 9.
That seems extremely relevant, to be honest. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, you also learn, what the implications are for the engineering construction market, which is obviously my focus. There's usually a lot of structural funds that become available. I don't know yet if they're going to kind of combine that with reconstruction, if they're going to really separate it.
So you're saying the EU kind of budget for after a session or during a session is going to be separate from reconstruction?
I don't know. I would assume so, because it addresses different questions and it's got a different focus. Pre-accession money is about compliance and moving towards EU norms and standards in every sector, not just engineering construction. Reconstruction is about rebuilding the country because of the war. Obviously, it pays to try to sort of combine those two. You don't want to reconstruct something in a way where 5 years later you're going to have to fix it or redo it.
The first thing comes to my mind that affects all of us, especially in my sphere, is the way the heating system works and the hot water.
Sure.
So those of you who don't know, I mean, it sounds a bit absurd because in America usually you have your own hot water unit. Very often also a source of heat within your unit or within your building. I grew up with a heating oil, like the heavy oil. It's a Northeast thing, and like they kind of fill up the house. Like the truck would come and on the side of the house you'd have little gas tanks or whatever. So that's one way to do it. But we had hot water heater within the unit. Here in Ukraine, so you have the heating stations that are spread out throughout the city, and they distribute the heat through hot water pipes that come in, and they circle through buildings and through the radiators and everything. Sometimes you get really good heat. Sometimes you get, maybe there's a little issue in the building, so then you're just getting warm water through your radiators, and it kind of causes issues. Also, they turned down the amount of heat after the conflict 2014 because that was Russian gas, and it was basically, and people would it was so hot, people would open the windows. You remember this?
Yeah,
I remember so hot. You open the windows and let the hot air go out the window.
February.
Yeah, in February, because the heat was so hot and the gas was cheap. And then after that, you realize, whoa, that's money going to Russia, out the window, literally. So they kind of put lower heat. They've also kind of sporadically, try to do some kind of insulation type stuff. And then for the hot water for use for showers and stuff is also centrally heated. And I don't know all the engineering terms, but there needs to be the prophylactic repairs every summer. So for like 1 to 3 weeks, maybe a month, your district, your neighborhood, whatever, will lose all hot water. And it's great when it's not like that because you get unlimited hot water, as opposed to when I grew up with a family of 6 people and having whatever
hot water,
20 gallons, 40 gallons, or in the unit, and it was just 2 showers maybe, and 3 wasn't going to happen with a big family. So you weren't going to get hot water. But anyways, so you get unlimited water, but then in summer you're losing hot water for people go to the gym and take showers. I mean, it's a bit absurd. I mean, of course you can install hot water units, but it's not everywhere. So that's the first thing I was thinking about. I'm sure that is not EU standard. That's not engineering sound, and a lot of loss, as far as I understand, heat loss.
There's a whole range of issues with it that are not only are they not really consistent to a certain extent with what the EU would promote, but it's just not efficient.
Yeah.
I mean, even before pre-ascension, this was a struggle. Let's say it's been addressed by a range of different directions, donors, efforts over the years. And you've got competing issues with it that make it hard to reform. I mean, the first is to fix it, to take buildings that are on that network off that network is quite impractical. Okay, from an engineering perspective. Okay, that's why a lot of new buildings are built with their own boilers.
Yeah,
don't hook up. I mean, that's the message. Okay, some industries are if it's light or medium sized industry, trying to find other solutions than just get on the Almeida system, because it's not terribly reliable. The Almeida themselves are run, via, they link to thermal power plants, which are many of them mixed ownership of various oligarchs, different interest groups. There's no consensus on reforming them. I mean, you can't just demand a private entity reform. As well, they have this weird agreement. They had, I don't know if they still have it in every city. I mean, I think they've tried to address it legally, but it's a bit of a problem, where they have like an owner-operator type agreement with the thermal power facility, but they're not responsible for the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So they're basically, it's like the greatest energy service contract on earth is basically what they have that I can think of. So for that reason, things don't get fixed. The network doesn't really get maintained. That's the city's job.
Okay.
The city doesn't really have a revenue stream, a reliable one from which to take money to manage those repairs. And if you ask the average city in Ukraine, most of the network is probably 90+% falling apart. Okay.
And I know we said no revenue stream, but even paying the basic bills, because I saw the debt numbers on, here they can't really force you to pay your bills at the end of the day. You get a monthly bill, if you don't pay it, like they don't really have the ability, just like in the US, maybe just find your unit and just shut it off for electricity. So what happens is a lot of people just go, either they can't afford it, which definitely happens. You have these old women that are on pensions that can't even cover the heat cost, much less everything else. Or people who just don't care, kind of sociopaths almost. So the debt number I saw, I did the calculations quickly at the exchange at the time. It was like $2 billion across the country.
Yeah, it's $2 billion
it's not
debt. Sustainable. That's just it.
Yeah.
So and that brings up the other point, right? You've got a population whose ability to pay is somewhat limited. The legal mechanisms to force payment are not very good. I mean, you've got all these things that sort of compete. You're in a country where, the political populist nature of how it's governed, raising tariffs, doing these things, which is going to be eventually in accord with what the EU is going to ask.
No doubt.
You got to pay for stuff, okay? Yeah. You're in a society where still a lot of people just don't believe they should have to do that. Mm-hmm. And not for any specific reason, they just don't want to.
Yeah. Well, also Soviet Union, like everything was free, or it was Copex.
It is.
Yeah, but
it is.
The mentality is still around. It was Copex back then.
I mean, when you visited my former apartment years ago, if you remember, okay? It's down here on Pushkinskaya, which is not far from where we are now. It's an older part of the city. It's in your zone, right? Okay,
sure.
So
it's Prime Street.
And the last couple of the winters after 2014 and 15, I mean, I'd be lucky if in January, February, I had 16 or 17 degrees.
Oh, wow.
But then the heat bill, multiplied by a factor of 10. Mm-hmm. And, I can pay, but even I'm sitting here saying, okay, well, wait a minute. I mean, the heat doesn't work. It's one thing if I live in a sauna, I pay to live in a sauna, right? But if I live in a cave, I kind of expect the price adjustment to make sense. And this is the problem, is that because the infrastructure just doesn't work, it just doesn't function, there really is no good way to balance that. So what inevitably happens is the government finds ways to subsidize. That kicks the can down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not a solution.
One of the things that EU pre-ascension presupposes, is that the overall, let's say, well, not wealth, but income generation capacity of the society is going to go up, meaning just household incomes will go up, I mean, generally speaking, there are sort of standards for different comparable markets about what percent of household income should go for paying for heat, paying for water, paying for whatever, electricity, right? I mean, varies a bit, but some things you can do a EU standard, you can do an Eastern European standard, you can do a global standard if you want to. But the thing is, because it's more or less a percentage, just, basic math, right? If the total money in the household goes up, then that percentage number equals a bigger figure. It's always a little bit maddening when I hear government officials who go on these study tours to places like Finland or Sweden or wherever, and they see these magnificent municipal systems for water treatment or whatever, heating or these things. And I want that. And they forget that the household incomes are a little bit higher and people pay their bills.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, this is not a comparable for Kyiv. Okay, I tell people when I am asked to give advice, go look at the experience Romania and Bulgaria had getting into the EU.
Yeah, it seems to be most relevant, of course.
It's way more relevant.
I mean,
it's way more
forget
relevant.
about anything else outside that. Just find the best practices. It goes into someone to talk about moving forward too with the reconstruction. Part of the reconstruction is not just putting up new buildings, replacing old ones, is fixing current ones. And there's been other projects in Eastern Germany, Poland, all these other countries. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, right? So like anyone from here goes over to Sweden or something or Scandinavia and looks for any comparison, I think they're going to be spinning their wheels.
It's not the best example. The other thing is that you've got sort of what I call more nuanced operator models. It's not just a centralized Dublin Ergo providing all the service, right? Mm-hmm. There's opportunities for private sector investment. There's opportunities for substation, privatization. The old Soviet stuff into
sure.
Yeah. It's more of a competitive type market economy, or at least it allows for that. I mean, some places it doesn't make a lot of sense, but you have the option. Here, technically now, some of the laws allow for the option, but again, because of the declining revenue model that we have already described, most ESCOs or models like that for district heating are just completely unattractive. I mean, they would want a concession model that probably is not tenable for most communities. I would assume not. I mean, I don't have like math on that, but
I think also the heating was just one example. But this probably we could talk probably hours about the different things that need to be changed from this Soviet legacy place, to the European standard that we all want to see, of course. What about in general then? Prospects for reconstruction. So what I mean, obviously the need is there. It was there. The need was almost there before the war.
Yeah, I mean, some things were
degradation of things was bad enough where it needed to be like gut everything. If you've ever seen pipes that have been changed in the streets here, I always like look in and see this huge hole in the ground. Like a new building was going up in the center. Yeah, and the building itself paid for all the new electrical and plumbing pipes to come into the building because the city wasn't going to pay for it. So,
sure.
But you could just see the old ones, and they're this wide, but they're really only passing through 1/8 of
they're watering the earth thoroughly.
Yeah, for plus sure. the holes and the rust, and then inside apartments too. Something we do like. Just you got these old cast iron pipes going through the building, and then someone in the middle might do a renovation and put in PVC, but you have cast iron above and cast iron below, and so it's all like mixed match. So the need for reconstruction is absolutely there. It was there before the war, and now this is kind of like a major chance for Ukraine to get it. I think we talked a little privately about some of these issues, obviously, but I think most interesting is like what are the biggest obstacles. My thing for me, look, it seems to be not the best practices, which can be found somewhere, not the labor, the kind of skills. I mean, these can be found, but the biggest thing for me that I think Ukrainian stubbornness, which is what kind of partially makes them able to fight off Russia so well, but it also can make them not amenable to the changes needed. So legislation for me means diversifying who's doing the work. It can't just be all Ukrainian companies. So I think there might be issues where all this money's been promised by the West or whatever, and the Ukrainians are like, no, we did the fighting, we're doing the reconstruction, just give us the money. And this kind of entitlement is just not going to fly.
It's probably not going to fly. I mean, I'd be surprised if it does. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm all in favor of doing a reconstruction because of the benefits it serves for the West, not just for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Having a country that's poor and corrupt on your borders with people running back and forth has downsides, for the space in which you're trying to attain security.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So there's plenty of reasons to want to invest in Ukraine, but I think they're going to have to find some kind of middle ground, I think, between the state and the Western governments about how the money is governed, how things are procured. There are Ukrainian companies in some cases that are probably capable of doing certain things. I like to think mine is, okay.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, there are not enough of them to do things at any kind of reasonable pace for reconstruction.
Yeah. No, you see the new buildings in the center. I mean, 12 floors, it's going to be about 11 floors, not too huge. Yeah. It's tucked away. It seems to look really nice, and they're saying 5 years to commission construction. Yeah. What? 11 floors?
Yeah,
I mean, build the Pentagon in 6 months, right?
It's just
all these different stories. It's just crazy. It takes 5 years to build it. And it's a financing issue. They're just like slowly.
There's also regulatory stuff there. I mean, I don't want to say it's not a joke, okay, but one of the talking points that I hear and I occasionally repeat to clients who come here, whether they're industrial, private sector clients, or folks who work in the donor sphere, Ukraine, in terms of the service personnel to the working day or billable hour, whatever you call it, we're cheaper, but things here take twice as long.
Yeah,
and there's not a lot we can do about that. one would hope that this might kind of get dragged into the light right now because there's going to be pressure to do things faster.
Yeah, no doubt.
But, again, I haven't seen it yet. So that's something that I kind of would like to see evolve out of this, is that they actually address reforming the engineering construction as a sector from a legal perspective,
absolutely,
from a practical perspective. If the folks are that impatient to get things done, okay, the government is also the RADA. You make the laws.
Yeah.
Why would you not change this? Okay, and I think there are reasons for that. I mean, part of it is traditionally, okay, and again, this might be different in the current circumstances. Working on things like engineering construction is not sexy, right? They have other more populist areas in which they focus. I don't know if they know what to change it to. I mean, this is the thing that I'm hoping pre-ascension provides. It is now a target. It's a guiding, endpoint to this of, okay, if you're going to change things, I actually want to improve them. Like you said, now you can go talk to some of the folks who've joined the EU in the last decade and a half, folks in the Balkans, other Eastern European states, who had a lot of very similar Soviet-era laws in place. How did you guys do this? What was the roadmap?
Yeah. I haven't seen much change on, like, say, the residential side and the new constructions. Like, by hook or by crook, developers find a plot of land, there's something on it, maybe something historical they want to destroy to build something big. So they get it after years, might even kind of get hold of it, take the roof off so it collapses even. That way they say it's blighted, and it takes a couple of years. And then after they do that, then they're working on permissions, and they start doing the construction. It takes years, and they're financing it usually by the sales. So they sell a few, and they keep it going.
Years down the road.
Yeah, and then they don't sell enough, so then the construction slows down.
Or stops.
Yeah, I know. I lived across, my recent apartment, I lived across from new construction, and over 2 years they were installing windows. Just the windows, and they weren't even finished when I moved out after 2 years, And again, I'm guessing it was because of the financing. They weren't selling enough to get it. They were asking very hefty numbers before the war. So there's all these issues, and I just can't continue. And again, we need 1 billion more square meters. Let's say some people aren't going to come back. A couple million Ukrainians maybe don't come back, or maybe it's more focused in different areas, or just whatever. But still, massive amount in the construction, it's not going to work. There's little piddly stuff. So I think for me, the legislation would be the biggest thing to kind of open up and
certainly one of the areas. I mean, the other thing too, you would hope, if you can also provide, what I'm hoping is being at least discussed within Reconstruction is, okay, how are you going to let contractors work under FIDIC type conditions, which is what, the Western world is going to want for a lot of the contractual agreements.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, FIDIC demands, performance bonding and insurance and all these things, which was not easily attainable here before the war. It was improving. Okay. It was better since 2014. I'll say that. But still nowhere near good enough to allow for contractors to bid aggressively and give reasonable cash flow models to where they don't have to work as their own bank.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing.
I a few years back we did a little bit of general contracting. Okay, we've dabbled in it, but I looked at some of the other banks, outside of just the ones where I have corporate accounts, and talk about conditions for getting a performance bond or this side of thing. And I mean, the conditions are ridiculous. I mean, they're absurd. And I don't necessarily blame the banks. I realize that they're just, working in the sector in terms of what they can offer.
For the banks make money here too, is more on fees and kind of, right? Like the rules, the laws make you go through the banks, and then the banks say, we'll just take a percentage here, 1.5% here. And so they're not making money off loaning or bonds. I mean,
last year, we did some work on a port project. And we were responsible for helping the client find potential contractors. And we talked to some guys from Odessa who are big. I mean, they're a pretty large firm, very focused on certain types of infrastructure, very experienced. Their office is far nicer than mine. Let's just say that, okay? They have a pretty wealthy clientele, portfolio of experience. And then we asked them about performance bonding and insurance and stuff. Well, they said, well, I mean, we can do all that, but we're just, it's going to increase our price by 20%. What we usually do is just ask the client to either, prepay certain supplies and stuff like that, where again, they're basically putting some of that contractor risk back on the client. Now, most Western clients hate that. I mean, it doesn't happen at all in their market. And I said, so even you guys, I mean, basically they're no different than myself, which I was a little surprised. I thought they might be a little more capable of doing this. They just said, no one here is.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because, I mean, again, Odessa's got its own, it's a different part of the country. They do a lot of stuff on ports. They do a lot of stuff in that type of infrastructure. That's where it all happens for that sector. And the very fact that they themselves were very open about the fact that it's no different.
Yeah.
Kind of tells you that, my assumption is if it's true for them, it's pretty much true for everybody.
Yeah, man. And there's a couple of really good developers in Kyiv. I don't think any of them are getting anything from banks.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's just where you keep your money. Yeah, really. Like you said, it's
not doing it. Some take profit from another project and use part of that to fund maybe half of it. Okay. Right. And, so there's there's a range of how bad they are. But some are starting off with almost nothing. Yeah. Hyping it up. And if it's hot here, Ukrainians get hot. Like, oh, this is going to be great. Prices are going to triple by the time it's finished. So it's speculative on the buyer side. A lot of speculators just think it's guaranteed, and even they get burned. They've been burned so many times. 2008, 2014, they've been burned.
I was going to wonder. I've heard that before too. I mean, a lot of these prepaid guys. I mean, I know it was back about 4 or 5 years ago. A number of them were lobbying the mayor's office here in Kyiv to get their money back. And I'm terrified if they actually did. I hope they didn't do it. I mean,
I'm sure they did. There has to be risk, obviously. So they're trying to get rid of risk and say, it's a speculative instrument. They don't really know. They think it's investing. I say it's not investing. It's a speculative instrument. If you're putting money in something that isn't there, and in a country that has a reputation for not finishing, because as you know, there's many unfinished buildings around, new buildings.
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, I said there's probably more of those than get finished. I mean, I would say the rate of failure or at least delay. Yeah. And again, it's purely visual observation.
I would say delay must be almost close to 100%.
I was going to say, I don't think anything finishes on time.
No, and even at the ones that say 5 years, you can assume it's 10. So whoever's buying it, I don't know. So there's all those issues, and, I don't know. Those big changes need to be made. So, but with that in mind, what would you say is the number one issue, like for the reconstruction aspect? What do you think the number one obstacle to getting significant, I'm talking about obviously massive funds from partners and donors into the reconstruction?
Well, I mean, I think I can think of a couple big barriers. Okay, there's a few ways to answer that question because I don't actually know which barrier is the biggest. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the first one is the really painfully obvious, right? The fighting has to get died down to a level where we sort of get past the point of too risky and we get started.
Okay, the risk, that's implied.
It's implied, but I mean the conversations are happening as I understand it. The second thing is I hope that the Ukrainian government's working with the donors to really identify a combination of meeting the needs, getting the best value for the reconstruction fund, and really I guess going back to meeting the needs. Balancing time versus,
price.
Time versus price and getting the best option.
Yeah, that's the thing.
The issue that I see, even in the Western world, okay, the people who work for donors or work for, anybody who might be advising the government right now, there is no comparable situation to this anywhere. I mean, the other wars that have been fought in the last 30 years don't look like this.
Major land wars. Kind of thought
where you wipe out. Yeah, and you've got this many displaced people and the level of destruction. And I mean, Kharkiv is down right now to about 25% of the pre-war population. That was a pre-war population of over 1 million people. That's astonishing. Okay. And you've got multiple cities, in the hundreds of thousands population that are almost fully depopulated right now.
It might not be rebuilt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other debate. And that kind of goes to my point is what's most important to get done first? How do you do that? And then what do you do on the more medium and longer term? Now, I had a conversation with an advisor to the government not too long ago. And he asked me this question for certain types of infrastructure. I told him that honestly, if I were doing it, the first thing I would do is divide immediate need from longer term planning and thinking and investing, from the reconstruction perspective. The temptation is to want to combine them. I do not think you can for most things. It is just it's not going to work. Yeah. Okay. You have to have people in homes with heat, power, and water in a couple of months. Yeah. Okay. That does not mean that's the best long-term solution. Okay, I mean, you might have them in modular buildings, you might have them in temporary dormitories, you might have them in all kinds of things. And you're probably going to have to spend some money getting those things in place or getting them functioning good enough. And then think, okay, what do I want to do 18 months from now or 2 years from now? If you're going to permanently resettle people, or will people go back to places like Sumy, Chernihiv, recovered territory in Kherson or Kharkiv region? We don't know, right?
Yeah,
this is the thing.
The demographic shift, it's going to be a shift regardless.
It's a very hard problem.
Yeah, some people are not coming back. Let's face it, millions of people left, but I just saw you a month ago, and then I came back last week, and the city's significantly more full than it was.
Yeah.
So, which brings me to one of the points of the demographic shift is that even though Ukraine might almost certainly end up with significantly fewer people in the country, maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million or something, out of almost 40 million, I think Kyiv will be much bigger. I think a lot of people will come here for the work, and it's a capital city, But Kyiv doesn't have the infrastructure, hasn't had the infrastructure to match its population since probably the late 80s, I think.
And it was struggling. Listen, for 2014, you had a big influx of people that were displaced from East Ukraine. It's never really dealt with that.
Yeah, we were in the middle of that. And that was the only way you could make any money in real estate as an agent or anything. I didn't have my company at the time just yet, was to work with people from the East, and they were coming in. They were buying a lot of stuff because they had cash. They didn't want to leave it out, so put it in banks. So they were just buying anything for any price almost, just to put it into real estate. Some people came here, found temporary places to live, but they realized they couldn't stay. They couldn't find work, so they would just kind of bounce to a secondary city, one of the million-person cities, which is one of the benefits of Ukraine versus Russia. Actually, Russia has kind of Moscow, Petersburg, kind of everywhere else. It doesn't have the 10 million person cities.
Well, and they're also there's massive distances between those cities. They have fundamentally different economies. I don't know Russia that well. I've never spent a lot of time there. But you talk to a lot of people who have, right? The business communities we know often. At one time, it was pretty integrated. There's a lot of business going back and forth.
Yeah, no, and there was everything like it. In 8 years to go from I moved here from Moscow. I lived in Russia for a couple of years. Moved there from Moscow. It was kind of like going from New York to Boston almost in some ways, culturally it wasn't that different. And, Kyiv's still a strongly Russian-speaking city, but definitely see a lot more Ukrainians and a lot of written Ukrainians. So you really got to know a little bit of Ukrainian to get through. But just culturally, I would kind of criticize something in Russia that I saw, and they were like, kind of almost like offended Ukrainians. People have friends here would be like, why are you being so rough on them? Maybe they saw a little too much themselves, and then the divergence and the way Russia's lost Ukraine, I think, put it frankly. But the economy.
If it hasn't, I don't know what losing a neighbor looks like. You've invaded them, you're committing a genocide, you're doing all kinds of.
Just can't imagine 8 years to go. So it's like us invading Canada or something, and just making them hate us all of a sudden. So it's been pretty wild, but. I think a lot of benefits in Ukraine too, with the diversification of industries, not having the resource curse necessarily, agriculture, transportation. The rivers, they can, they're not. I think they're like 90% down from the Soviet times of moving cargo or something like that.
Yeah, it fell dramatically ever since the Soviet Union.
Yeah, so like so many different industries I think that could pop up. Tourism isn't getting started here, so. Anyways, we'll have to see how they deal with the demographic shift and who's going where, and no one can really tell you in advance. So, in terms of the engineering everyone's seen the news. It was so hard to see. Places we've been before that hit by rockets and missiles and everything, and so some buildings will have to be obviously taken down.
Probably.
The one thing. Those, like, if you can salvage it, given how much the deficit there already is, you kind of want to salvage it. What do you think about the technical aspects of repairing a damaged building? Do Ukrainian engineers have the kind of skills to do this stuff? It doesn't seem like there's a lot of repairing anything. You see there's new buildings that are super shiny, there's old buildings that are decaying, and not many people are involved in repairing older buildings.
There's no shortage of, pre-war, there were not a shortage of old buildings that need to be patched up, right?
Yeah.
Here's the thing, right? Reconstruction is a different question than just sort of improving an existing asset, okay? Because, this is the source of capital, right? If I'm going to make a building better because it's old, I don't like it, it's coming from my pocket or it's coming from somebody's pocket, right? Reconstruction is, an external source that's designed to move things at least back to a living level that is as good or better than before. So I don't think the financial resources to do it will be there, to look at best options. The Ukrainian, I don't worry about Ukrainian engineers figuring things out. Okay. I mean, again, I don't think there's a technical bottleneck. There may not be enough of such engineers. I can imagine that problem. But, you know, the current regulatory environment, as it reads, if you've got a building that's been badly damaged by shelling, very good chance, if you're just going to give it to a commercial firm and say, listen, I need you to redesign a solution and go forward, they're going to say, knock it down. Okay, because of the risk the design firm takes on when you start dealing with a structure that, you know, if it's been hit by a rocket, or, I mean, I don't have a good notion of that. It's the same with like a bridge, right? Okay, maybe part of the bridge can be salvaged, but building around the part that can be salvaged ends up being more risky and certainly more expensive than knocking it down.
Yeah.
Okay. Now if it's superficial damage, right? Okay, the windows are blown out, some ammunition scarring on the outside and stuff. That's not a big deal. Okay, you can largely do routine repair stuff and, you know, get it back, and it's livable. There's people still living in it. I mean, if you go up to, I was up in, you know, Borodianka a couple of months ago. We came back down through Hostomel, Bucha, and Irpin, and you'll see buildings where there's a portion of a, you know, big long, you know, kind of apartment block of buildings, you know, 4 or 5 stories by 12, okay, or 15, you know, such rows going in a line. And I mean, you've got people with blown out windows and stuff that still living there. You know, so
that I can imagine. I guess my point of view, just knowing that there's many different types of buildings, and they, you know, they take damage in different ways. And the question for me is like, you know, so in the center of Kyiv, you have a lot of mostly, I would say, brick buildings, overall majority that were built kind of mostly in Russian imperial times. A lot of them, like this one we're in right now, my office. Then you have those Stalin ones also with this, you know, both of those have 2 to 3 foot thick walls.
Yeah, massive
brick construction.
Yeah.
So I mean,
resource use, as we say.
Yeah, I guess there's that aspect too. But it seems like out in the villages there where a lot of the fighting was, so people aren't aware. There was very little kind of fighting within proper Kyiv. It was mostly in the oblast and in America we would call the suburbs. But we don't really say that much here. But and there you have a real mix of Soviet level housing. Some of them would be brick maybe, but a lot of them were prefab panel buildings, they're called, where you take chunks and kind of tie them all together. You know, might have a skeleton of reinforced concrete, and then all the slabs are kind of put together in different ways. Those seem to have taken the worst damage, where you have sections that completely collapse, where it was pretty strong until a couple pieces, you know, got damaged. And then, so curious about that. And one thing, Dan and I already discussed this privately, and I'm wondering what some of our viewers are thinking. We had an idea maybe to do a field trip out to some of the damaged areas and have a look at the engineering and structural issues that tie into, again, trying to salvage as many buildings as possible without taking on the risk and, you know, and the extra cost. I mean, no one wants that, but I mean, it's just, it just takes so long to get things done here, and people need somewhere to live. So we had an idea to do a field trip and do a little, check things out for it, do another video. Ask all the questions that I have. I don't know, you know, some people could call it war tourism or something like that. I think, you know, Dan and I are both professionals. So for us, I mean, there is that emotional aspect of seeing it for the first time. I haven't seen it up close. I mean, I took the bus in from Poland and saw a little bit. It definitely hits you differently. Everyone says when you see it for real. And I think even the presidents from Europe came to visit, and Macron and Schultz, and they went to see there, and it was not the same as seeing them in the news. So besides that, though, I think there is a lot to be discussed. And again, we don't want to wait till it's too late to start talking about serious issues. So anyways, you can reply in the comments or write to me directly, or write to Daniel and see if you think it's a bad idea or a good idea, if you're interested or not interested. You know, it's something I want to hear some feedback on that. So another question I have, so, you know, going back to what we talked about, if Ukraine to go on, has it been going on? It's not gonna get where it needs to be. You know, if you're doing what you always did, you're not gonna get what you want. Basically, you know, you're gonna get what you always got. You know, so do you have any ideas that you've seen, kind of concepts from other places, maybe Bulgaria, where you think might be useful in solving some of the issues? Like I told you before, and I was in the Philippines, so there was a huge swath of area in Manila that used to belong, or was under control of the U.S. military, and then pulled out, I think, in the 90s. they started pulling their bases out. And it's just massive territory. And Philippine government, to their credit, they did a good job. They kind of stopped. They didn't let any kind of development start doing all hodgepodge. They parceled off the land. I think I'm sure they set up infrastructure, not just infrastructure, but legislative stuff to say how it's going to look, broader concept. And the area, it's called the Bonifacio Global City, BGC. And that's where a lot of the embassies are, headquarters, tons of housing, a lot of new buildings, beautiful buildings actually from some significant developers and architects like IMP. That's something cool. I think there's some slivers of Ukraine and even maybe Kyiv Oblast that are undeveloped, and if they're parceled off in a proper and civilized way and done the infrastructure, they could add significant housing much faster than, again, tearing down a building and putting up one building. So I don't know if you have any other ideas or if that.
Well, it's possible. I mean, it's always tricky. It's not impossible. Other countries, cities have done that. Mm-hmm. When you start kind of, I don't want to say artificially, but sort of, trying to redesign cities or build upon them at a fast pace, aside from what one might call sort of the natural demand. Mm-hmm. Kyiv's capital, like you said, they're going to have probably a lot of people come here for work. Yeah. Lviv is going to have a lot of that. I would think some of the other Western Ukrainian cities of modest size, places like Zhytomyr, Klemensky, Vinnytsia, mm-hmm. Will experience some. But you've got to match the jobs. You've got to match some of the other infrastructure realities. Mm-hmm. And this takes kind of careful planning and consideration. So, a lot of things can be done. But the traditional risk in Ukraine is that ideas like this tend to get put into the category of pet project. Mm-hmm. They get politicized. And they sort of shut out the kind of expertise they really need to do things correctly. Mm-hmm. That's traditionally what I've seen in the past. There were developments in Kyiv. You remember, what's the name of this neighborhood in Lviv? It's got almost like the toy house looking, all these colorful...
Podil, you mean?
Yeah, on Podil, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Vozdvizhensky.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a good example. Almost nobody lives there.
Yeah, that was all speculative too. People bought.
Yeah.
2006, 2007.
It looks not bad from the outside. I looked at an office down there years ago, more than a decade, when I was with, and the guy showing the building was a young guy, and he openly said, "Look, I get a commission for this. I won't lie to you. Rent on the first floor because the water doesn't go to any others."
Okay. Structure issues there.
Brand new development, And so again, I mean, could that sort of thing work? Well, potentially. But whoever did this obviously had absolutely no idea what they were doing.
Yeah. The developers there, I think the time it did match kind of the taste, but it wasn't very far-sighted. It was a development of kind of row homes almost. It kind of looks like, what would you say, Holland or something,
Yeah, it's kind of a quasi-European.
Different colors.
Very colorful. I mean, it stands out.
Very
You
colorful.
drive into this place and it doesn't look like the rest of Podil, certainly.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's some nice restaurants there. There's a few offices, but compared, I'm sure, to the cost of development, it's a total.
And the plan, the cost of purchases was much. Development,
it's a total mess.
It was sold just before the peak 2008. So yeah, that's something to be avoided. That's definitely the case. But also, Philippines, they have. I think when the national government there focused on something, they get it done. It's almost like a dictatorship.
Well, it could be
a dictatorship. Here, it is it's a messy democracy, but it is a democracy, and taking also if one person, property rights can be sometimes too strong. I mean, I'm generally not a fan of eminent domain because it can easily be abused, and I know some cases in the U.S. But at the same time, like here, when one person, one holdout says no, then there's nothing you can do, and it could affect the whole, multi-hectare development and stuff like that. So.
I mean, one of the things that I've talked about with some of the contractors and a little bit with my own team, right? I mean, if you want to look past just the very immediate needs of reconstruction, again, those, the 2 to 4 month horizon.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would do is I would look at some of the cities in which you anticipate probably getting, more people. You want to maybe attract some industries or jobs or do these things. Get some experienced foreign engineers in and do real urban planning. They do not do that here in this country.
Yeah. Well, I know someone involved in it, but
it's a joke.
Meeting with the mayor, and then he's like, "Yeah, we got sidelines."
It's like, I saw this building in Frankfurt that I really like. I'd like one here. I mean, it's those kinds of almost childlike attitude towards the subject that derails it. And this is what I think I'm hoping. And again, it doesn't matter if it's the national level, city level, wherever. You can do options for things like
comprehensive, I think, right? That's
fairly comprehensive, reasonably cost efficient. It's going to cost some money. You're not going to, don't pick the lowest cost option every time. Mm-hmm. That's also a temptation here. Yeah, okay. Somehow you're saving money. And it's kind of like picking the cheapest chemotherapy. I mean, some things, understand what I mean.
That's a good point too. The saying here is like the cheap pay twice, right?
Well, I always am amazed at people who, and this is true. I mean, in the Balkans, it's not an uncommon phenomenon, right? You want to spend upwards of $100 million on future investments and whatnot, but you don't want to pay $500,000 for planning.
Yeah.
If the planning is wrong, your $100 million, the risk range goes in both directions like you can't believe. So then that's just kind of I don't want to call it a cultural phenomenon, but you'll see it here repeatedly.
No, for sure.
And I would start that relatively soon. I mean, what I would recommend against, again, is sort of, and I know it's hard right now because there's so much pressure on every government, unit. I mean, let's say that this is pretty unprecedented. Putting that off is tempting, but what's going to happen is you're going to get 6 to 8 months down the road. You're going to ask maybe some foreign consultant or someone, hey, okay, here's what I need. And they're going to say, we need to spend about a year on this to do it right. And then you'll have it. You'll have a 20-year plan. And they'll say, I don't have a year. I have 4 months.
Yeah. No, there's always pressures.
Everybody wants things done sooner. Mm-hmm. I mean, everywhere on earth, okay? But again, this is something you do once. Right.
Again, it's once in a lifetime.
It's kind of like if unless you want to repeat what's going on, I hope it's once in our lifetime. Okay.
Let's hope.
This is the other lesson is look, you're probably going to be, as we discussed earlier regarding the sources of financing and its governance, you're probably going to be forced to listen anyway. Mm-hmm. You're better off buying into the process, but demanding those foreign consultants and those foreign companies perform.
Yeah.
I have worked on donor projects, Sean, where the performance of some foreign companies is abysmal.
Oh yeah,
it's embarrassingly bad.
And the final products, you mean?
It's crap. It doesn't go right. I mean, the budgets are wrong. It's done poorly. A lot of how do I say it? I mean, there's kind of a weird relationship, sometimes between donors and foreign firms. I mean, the donors don't know who to believe. You've got one group in the government saying this isn't what I want. You've got the company saying, well, it's not part of
it's a tricky environment. Ukraine has some real specific kind of things.
It is, but I have seen, listen, the international business environment for a lot of contractors, there's an element of at times predation. Mm-hmm. Okay, because they try to sell things that maybe aren't needed and they push for stuff. And that presses the capacity of the government to recognize when, hey, maybe there's some of this stuff I can say I don't really need. Let's stick with the plan, or when to listen, right?
Just because it's foreign doesn't mean it's needed or good, right?
Yeah, I mean there is a balance, and there has been some ugly projects done here. I've seen them. We've been on a few. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've gotten off of a couple because it was just so bad that first of all, I wasn't getting paid on some of them, which made it really easy. Mm-hmm. But I used to work for a big European company, and I run a small one now. I've been on both sides of that table. There are benefits to both. Mm-hmm. But my feeling is that instead of trying to dictate terms, if I'm giving the Ukrainian government advice, listen, don't be afraid to buy into it, but then insist that they perform. Mm-hmm. That's the better value for money proposition.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
And again, that's just been, now it's about 18 years professional experience doing that kind of thing. I feel like that's decent tenure.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We're going to need a lot of people like you to get this place done properly, that's for sure.
Well, like I said, I talked to a few of the guys in the government now. They're not unreceptive. Mm-hmm. They'll admit too, it's not always clear how, fundamental decisions are made, but that's true in a lot of governments. And the government right now is under a lot of pressure. I mean, I'm not overly critical of what's happening right now because there's no government on earth that I can imagine that would be able to function with a clear head and focused under the current
given what's going on. Yeah.
So I think fair is fair. But that's kind of my take on the whole where to put your emphasis on these things.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And well, overall, in general, obviously you haven't left, you haven't closed your company, so you're overall optimistic. As am I. My family's not here just yet. I have a small child and stuff, but they want to come back.
Sure.
We want to resume our lives here. I think it'll be different regardless of what happens, but both optimists. So I think on that we can close out this video. Almost an hour here. Thank you for your time, Daniel.
Sure, my pleasure, Sean.
I think I'll have some videos in the future too, hopefully.
All right.
Good talking.
You bet.